There was a village called Obinagu, known for its beauty and rich natural blessings. The village was surrounded by green forests that stretched far into the horizon, rivers that flowed gracefully through the land, and fertile soil that made farming easy and productive. The people of Obinagu were hardworking and lived peacefully, relying on their close community ties to solve problems and maintain harmony. Life in Obinagu was simple but full of happiness, until a conflict over a piece of land called Ala Ndu changed everything. Ala Ndu was no ordinary land. It was believed to be a sacred gift from the gods. Stories told by elders described how Ala Ndu brought great blessings to those who owned it. Farmers who tilled the soil there always had bountiful harvests, and hunters who passed through its forests found game in abundance. It was said that the land held secrets of great wealth and power, passed down from generation to generation. This belief made Ala Ndu the most valuable piece of land in the entire village. The trouble began when two clans, Umunze and Ekeoha, both claimed that Ala Ndu belonged to them. The Umunze clan argued that their ancestors had farmed the land for centuries. They pointed to old farming tools and ancient footpaths as evidence that the land had always been theirs. On the other hand, the Ekeoha clan insisted that Ala Ndu was part of their inheritance. They claimed that their ancestors were buried there, and the presence of ancient burial mounds on the land proved their ownership. At first, the disagreement was quiet, with members of both clans making their claims during community gatherings. But as time passed, the argument grew louder and more bitter. The peaceful village became divided. People whispered behind each other's backs, spreading rumors and taking sides. Friends became distant, neighbors turned into enemies, and the harmony that once held the village together began to crumble. Seeing the growing tension, the village king, Igbo decided to intervene. Igbo was a wise and respected leader who had always worked to keep peace in Obinagu. He summoned the Council of Elders, a group of the oldest and wisest men and women in the village, to help him resolve the dispute. The council held long meetings where both clans presented their arguments. They listened carefully, trying to uncover the truth and find a solution that would satisfy everyone. But the meetings did not bring peace. No matter how much the elders debated, they couldn't agree on who had the stronger claim to Ala Ndu. The Umunze clan refused to give up their belief that the land was theirs by right of use, and the Ekeoha clan stood firm in their conviction that it was their sacred inheritance. Days turned into weeks, and the tension in the village only grew worse. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Igbo called a meeting of the entire village. Standing before the people, he spoke with a heavy heart. "My people," he said, his voice strong but filled with sorrow. "This land, Ala Ndu, is tearing us apart. We have allowed our pride and anger to turn us against one another. If we let this land divide us, it will destroy us. Remember, our strength is in our unity. Without it, we are nothing." Despite the Igwe's heartfelt warning, the conflict over Ala Ndu continued to simmer. The once peaceful village of Obinagu found itself trapped in a struggle that threatened to destroy the bonds that had held it together for generations. The people of the village were left to wonder if they could ever find a way to restore peace and harmony before it was too late. One quiet night, something very strange happened in Obinagu. The entire village was fast asleep when a loud, chilling cry broke through the stillness of the night. It echoed across the village, waking everyone. "Leave Ala Ndu alone, or blood will flow," boomed a deep, unearthly voice. The sound seemed to come from the direction of Agu, the dark and forbidden forest at the edge of the village. The people of Obinagu were filled with fear. Agu was no ordinary forest. It was a place everyone avoided, even during the day. The villagers believed it was home to witches, wizards, and restless spirits. Stories passed down from their ancestors warned them that anyone who entered Agu without permission would never return. For something, or someone, from that forest to speak was a terrifying event. The villagers gathered in small groups, whispering nervously about what the voice might mean. Some believed it was a warning from the gods. Others thought the spirits of the forest had grown angry with the fighting. Could this be a message to stop the quarrel over Ala Ndu? An elder asked, his voice trembling. But no one had any answers, only fear. Despite the frightening warning, the clans did not stop their fight. Instead, the mysterious voice made each clan more determined than ever. The Umunze clan believed the spirits were speaking in their FI. One day, tragedy struck in the fight over Ala Ndu. Tensions between the Umunze and Ekeoha clans boiled over, and violence broke out. In the chaos, 2 villagers were killed. Their deaths shocked the entire village, but only made the anger between the clans worse. Instead of bringing them to their senses, the loss pushed both sides closer to war. Determined to claim Ala Ndu, the 2 clans began preparing for battle. Warriors sharpened their machetes and spears, ready to fight to the death. Women worked tirelessly, weaving protective charms into the clothes of their warriors, praying that the spirits would shield their loved ones from harm. The village buzzed with activity, and fear hung heavy in the air. Both clans sought spiritual guidance from the village diviner, Neoma, a wise old woman with white hair and piercing eyes that seemed to see beyond the present. Known for her powerful visions, Neoma gave a grave prophecy. "If you fight," she said, her voice heavy with sorrow, "blood will flow like the rivers and the land will weep for generations." But her warning fell on deaf ears. Instead of seeking peace, the clans turned to powerful sorcerers to gain an advantage. Umunze called upon Dikeogu, a wizard known for summoning storms and bending the weather to his will. Ekeoha sought help from Adaku, a feared witch who could command the spirits of the dead. The involvement of these sorcerers only added to the fear and tension gripping the village. The warriors from both clans marched to Ala Ndu, determined to settle their dispute by force. The sky was unusually dark, even though the sun had already risen, as if nature itself knew that something terrible was about to happen. The battle began with a clash of machetes and the fierce cries of warriors. Arrows flew through the air like deadly rain, striking warriors on both sides. Dikeogu stood on a hill overlooking the battlefield. Raising his staff, he summoned a fierce windstorm that sent Ekeoha warriors tumbling to the ground. The Umunze clan cheered, believing victory was near. But Adaku was ready. Standing still as a statue, she whispered an incantation that summoned ghostly figures from the underworld. These spirits, pale and shadowy, swarmed onto the battlefield. Umunze warriors, seeing the terrifying apparitions, dropped their weapons and ran in fear. The fighting raged on, and blood soaked the once fertile land of Ala Ndu. The cries of the wounded and dying filled the air, mixing with the clash of weapons and the howling wind. By the time night fell, the battlefield was a scene of devastation. Bodies of the dead and injured lay scattered, and the ground was stained red with blood. Despite the heavy losses, neither clan was willing to admit defeat. Both sides limped back to their villages, wounded but still burning with anger and hatred. The battle had ended, but the war was far from over. Ala Ndu, once a land of blessings, had become a cursed and bloody battleground. The first battle between the Umunze and Ekeoha clans left both sides wounded and furious. Days turned into weeks, but instead of finding peace, their hatred deepened. The memory of their fallen warriors fueled their anger, and both clans became more desperate to claim Ala Ndu. They began preparing for a second battle, this time with even greater determination and fury. This time, the sorcerers were at the center of the preparations. Dikeogu, the storm wizard of Umunze, performed secret rituals in a sacred forest, summoning the forces of nature to fight on his side. He called for storms and lightning to rain destruction upon his enemies. Meanwhile, Adaku, the feared witch of Ekeoha, made a blood pact with the spirits of Agwu Ani. She promised them great sacrifices in exchange for their power. The air in Obinagu grew heavy with tension, as if the land itself knew that something terrible was about to happen. On the night before the battle, the village was shaken by a strange and terrifying event. A fiery comet streaked across the sky, bathing Ala Ndu in an eerie red light. The elders whispered that it was a warning from the gods, a sign of impending doom, but the clans refused to heed the warning. Each saw the comet as a symbol of their destined victory, and their determination grew even stronger. At dawn, the warriors of Umunze and Ekeoha gathered once again on the battlefield of Ala Ndu. The air was thick with tension and the distant whispers of the unseen. When the battle began, the ground trembled with the thunderous charge of warriors, their weapons gleaming in the dim light of the early morning. Dikeogu struck first. Standing tall on a hill, he raised his staff high, and the sky darkened. Thunder rolled, and lightning bolts struck the ground near the Ekeoha warriors. The earth cracked open, swallowing some into the depths below. The Umunze warriors roared in triumph, believing their victory was assured. But Adaku was unshaken. Standing at the edge of the battlefield, she sliced her palm, letting her blood drip onto the ground. The earth rumbled, and from it rose shadowy figures with glowing red eyes. These monstrous beings, part human and part beast, surged forward with incredible speed and strength, tearing into the Umunze warriors. The battle became chaos. Arrows darkened the sky, swords clanged, and screams filled the air. Then, an unnatural fog rolled in, shrouding the battlefield in impenetrable darkness. Warriors stumbled blindly, slashing at shadows and sometimes striking their own allies. Amid the confusion, a haunting wail echoed across the battlefield, chilling every heart. Warriors froze, their weapons slipping from their hands. Out of the fog emerged a towering figure, neither man nor spirit. It was draped in tattered black robes, its glowing white eyes burning like fire. The figure raised an arm and the wailing grew louder, piercing through the souls of everyone present. Then, with a sweeping motion, it brought its arm down, unleashing an invisible wave of force that swept across the battlefield. Warriors were thrown to the ground, their weapons scattered. Those who tried to stand found themselves choking, as if the very air had turned poisonous. The figure moved through the battlefield untouched, and wherever it passed, warriors fell lifeless, their bodies bearing no wounds. By nightfall, the battlefield was silent. The land was littered with lifeless bodies, and the surviving warriors fled in terror, abandoning the cursed Ala Ndu. The mysterious figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving no trace of its presence except the fear that lingered in the hearts of those who had seen it. Both clans returned to their villages, defeated and filled with dread. The land they had fought so hard to claim was now shrouded in mystery and fear. Ala Ndu, once thought to be a divine blessing, had become a place of death and darkness. For the first time, the people of Umunze and Ekeoha began to wonder if the gods were punishing them for their greed and hatred. For weeks, the villages of Umunze and Ekeoha were quiet, except for the sounds of cattle and children playing. But deep down, both clans knew that the peace wouldn't last. Anger still simmered between them. They both wanted to claim the land of Ala Ndu, to prove they could defeat the dark forces that haunted them. The warriors began to gather again, ready for one last battle. On the night before the battle, Dikeogu went back into the sacred forest. This time, he sought even darker magic. He performed a forbidden ritual, calling on the serpent spirit of the earth, Ogba. Dikeogu was consumed by visions of power and revenge. He promised Ogba that the clan would offer sacrifices in exchange for the serpent's help, but his heart had already been lost to greed. As the ritual ended, the ground shook. The sky turned dark red, and a strong wind blew through the village, knocking down trees. Dikeogu, lost in his trance, didn't notice the shadows moving from the forest. These shadows had a life of their own. When the ritual was complete, the serpent's spirit appeared in the sky, its huge glowing red eye watching over the battlefield. Adaku, sensing the growing power of her enemy, called on the spirits of Agu Ani. She promised them more blood in exchange for their help. As her ritual finished, the air became thick and the ground shook beneath her feet. Evil spirits emerged from the forest. The battle began with chaos. Dikeogu stood on a hill, watching his serpent spirit's eye burn bright in the sky. The winds howled and thunder filled the air. Lightning struck both Umunze and Ekeoha warriors. The ground trembled, swallowing men whole, and the sky turned dark, as if the gods had turned their backs on the land. Then, just when the clans seemed close to victory, a thick fog rolled in, just like the first battle. The warriors couldn't see their enemies. They fought blindly, but the fog twisted their senses. Each step led them deeper into the mist, until they could no longer tell friend from foe. Suddenly, a loud wail echoed from the fog. It was the same sorrowful cry as before. Out of the fog emerged a towering figure, its eyes glowing white. It was the Shadow of Ala Ndu, returned once again. The figure moved gracefully, and wherever it passed, warriors dropped to their knees, gasping for air. An invisible force swept across the battlefield, throwing warriors in all directions. The figure walked through the mist, untouched by the chaos, more powerful than before. Those who saw the figure could not fight back. Fear paralyzed them. Wherever it went, warriors collapsed without a wound, their faces frozen in terror. Adaku, feeling the power of Agu Ani's spirits, screamed and sent her shadow creatures forward. The beasts tore through the Umunze ranks, ripping them apart with their claws and teeth. For hours the battle raged. Blood spilled, weapons clashed, and warriors screamed in pain. But the dark forces seemed unstoppable. The spirits, the creatures, and the dark magic of Dikeogu and Adaku overwhelmed the warriors. The Shadow of Ala Ndu claimed its toll once more. The once proud warriors of both clans lay dead on the cursed land, their souls taken by the very land they had fought to control. The few survivors returned to their villages, broken and defeated. Ala Ndu, once a symbol of prosperity, had become a graveyard, a cursed place where death lingered in every corner. The earth itself seemed to mourn, as if it too had felt the weight of so much bloodshed. The elders of both clans gathered, their hearts heavy with sorrow. They had lost their best warriors, their leaders, and their hope. Ala Ndu was no longer a place of pride. It had become a place of destruction. There was no victory, no joy. Instead, the villagers wept for the lives lost, for the families torn apart, and for the land that would never bring them peace again. The names of Umunze and Ekeoha, once great, would be remembered not for their strength, but for the sorrow and bloodshed that had followed their greed for power. Ala Ndu remained silent. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying the cries of the fallen. The curse of Ala Ndu had claimed not only the land, but the souls of all who had fought for it. Adaku and Dikeogu, the ones who had called upon dark forces, fell to their knees. Their eyes were empty, their power gone. They realized too late the price they had paid. This battle, this curse, had consumed them all. They had called upon forces they could not control. The elders of both clans, who had once led with pride and honor, sat together in silence. They knew that the battle had cost them everything. The warriors, the children, the families, all had been lost in the pursuit of power. Ala Ndu, once a place of peace and life, had become a cursed land, a reminder of the greed and bloodshed that had destroyed both clans. The spirits of the land seemed to mourn, as if they too were grieving for the lives lost. Strange occurrences began to happen in the villages. Cattle would die for no reason, crops withered in the fields, and a dark cloud lingered above the land, never leaving. The people spoke of the curse of Ala Ndu, and some whispered that the spirits of the dead still walked the earth, unwilling to rest. The leaders of both clans called for a final gathering at the edge of the cursed battlefield. They hoped to find a way to lift the curse, but deep down they knew it was too late. The land had been tainted, and the price of their greed was too high. As they stood in silence, a strange figure appeared before them. It was the same shadowy figure that had haunted the battlefield, the Shadow of Ala Ndu. This time, it was different. It did not come with violence or destruction. Instead, it moved slowly, its eyes filled with sorrow. The villagers, too afraid to speak, watched as the figure approached. It was then that the elders understood. The Shadow of Ala Ndu was not just a spirit of death, but a spirit of vengeance. It had been summoned by the darkness within the hearts of the clans. The land itself had become cursed because of the bloodshed, the betrayal, and the endless desire for power. The shadow reached out, touching the soil with its cold, ghostly hands. And as it did, the earth trembled one final time. The villagers felt the weight of the curse lift from their hearts, but the land would never be the same. The Shadow of Ala Ndu had come to offer them a final choice. "You have spilled blood for power," the shadow's voice echoed hollow and cold. "Now you must choose. Will you continue to fight for what is already lost? Or will you learn from your mistakes and live in peace?" The villagers stood in stunned silence, realizing that the choice was theirs. But the cost had been great. Too many lives had been lost. The clans had torn each other apart in the pursuit of a land that no longer held any meaning. Slowly, the elders nodded, signaling the end of the bloodshed. There would be no more battles, no more fighting. The clans would no longer seek to claim the cursed land. Instead, they would rebuild their villages, but this time with humility, knowing that power gained through violence would only lead to destruction. As the Shadow of Ala Ndu faded into the mist, the villagers felt a heavy sadness fill the air. The curse had been lifted, but at what cost? The land of Ala Ndu would never be the same again. It would be a place of mourning, of remembrance, and of lessons learned too late. And so, the once great clans of Umunze and Ekeoha faded into history. Their names were spoken in whispers, not with pride, but as a warning to future generations.